Today, I want to talk about the like a strategic framework for a technology-driven hockey franchise, right? The future, the franchise of the future, and how like because it's funny. You heard the reports. I don't know if you read that article coming out of Toronto where Pelly brought in AI
Yeah.
reports at the trade deadline, and I know you're big into AI, Rich. I'm just not sure that's the way to use it.
Look, AI is simply an accelerator. If you have an old beat up jalopy with a couple of tire nuts taken off, and you start to accelerate at high speed, you die. And a hockey team's no different. It's just an accelerator. If you don't have a vision, you don't have the culture, you don't have the people in place, and you don't have the processes in place, you're just driving off the cliff. And it's the fundamental issue that companies that are trying to implement AI have is biting off more than they can chew, trying to do too much too fast without all of these things in place. Elon Musk hasn't succeeded because of technology. Elon Musk has succeeded because he's a genius, and he's applied technology with the genius that he's been naturally bred with, I guess. But because I can't imagine it's his Queen's University education, but who knows? So at the end of the day, I just think when you look at what you saw coming out of Toronto, if it's true, you're bringing Chat GPT into a scouting session or a trade deadline meeting. Okay, it's okay if it's simply going to guide you to maybe ask some unique questions, but when you don't have the processes in place, and like, I think the vision is really important for an NHL team. If you study the modern dynasties, and the ones that I rely on and have done a lot of research include the LA Dodgers, Golden State Warriors, New England Patriots, Manchester City, Paris Saint-Germain, and the Mumbai Indians, because they've dominated international or the Indian Cricket League for a number of years. But what they have done is they have decided, unlike it appeared Treliving had decided, he was going to get an extra round. He was going to accelerate, maybe get a little bit further in the playoffs. And that leads him to trade 2 first-round picks and their best prospect, probably would have been the future captain of the Leafs. These dynasties have decided from the get-go, when new ownership took over, they're going to be a modern dynasty. That's what we're doing. We're not going to win one cup. We're going to make decisions that we believe, with technology, are going to get us to where we want to be. That's what, even back as long as John Wooden, Coach Wooden, who I was blessed enough to spend a lot of time with, partly through my UCLA connections where I went to school. Coach did a research project every year. If he felt he needed a little bit of a bump on free throws or some form of a defensive set, he found the 5-6 organizations in the country that were best at that. Then he got on the road, he went and saw them, he learned what he could. I mean, he didn't have technology at his side, but there's a process-driven coach with a vision, and his vision was to win championships every year. And he did it 10 times the last 12 years he was at UCLA. But you apply technology to any company that's in disarray, you're just going to get to disaster faster, and you're going to spend more money doing it because you got to buy the AI. So what I saw today didn't make sense to me, because AI is simply a tool in the tool chest of a very capable carpenter. That's all it is.
Well, and really the big one when you look at the franchise of the future is going to be the hockey teams and operations who work in the business of managing and operating a hockey team, compared to those who work on the business of building the future success, right? And it's two very different ones.
Well, every successful Fortune 7, which are now all technology companies, have, and many other Fortune 500 have learned that Google search is a good example. Google searches hockey operations. When Google search started, it was a search company. They were working, I'm sure, 24/7, 365, trying to figure out how to get us hooked on ads, how to sell ads, and doing all the things they do. Where did Gmail come from? And Android phones, and Google Earth, and all of those other things. It came from a group of people that they had working on the business. So if you're drafting at 12.3%, NHL teams on average are drafting core players, that's top 6 forwards, third line center, top 4D, and number 1 goalie, at an average, because the rest of the guys you can get at Walmart. And they're drafting those at a rate of 12.3%. seems like the expectations should be slightly higher. So how do you address that? Well, you can employ technology to do that, but you need a group of people. You see, and you talk to the guys at the Oilers, you see what the Oilers management team is doing. You see them flying back and forth and being on the road and doing all those things. They are Google search. They don't have the time. And so the way the LA Dodgers and all of these Manchester City, Paris Saint-Germain, that Mumbai Indians have done, they've set up their own innovation group, much like Google did. They set, and in LA, it's called the Elysian Park Ventures. So what Elysian Park Ventures does, they focus on finding investments that will make their organization stronger. And they focus on 3 different returns on investment. They look at, we will invest if we can get some return in the following 3 areas. Individual team growth in terms of their performance, enhanced team performance, or contribution to the bottom line. Now, if we can get all 3 of those, that's a home run investment. But that's what those teams are doing. And they're doing it because when Guggenheim Partners bought the Dodgers, we all thought they were crazy at $2 billion at that time. They treated it like any other private equity investment. We've got this brand. How are we going to exploit it? And they did it through the innovation applications. We learned a little bit about that last week with Jonathan Bradley. How do the Edmonton Oilers, how do the Calgary Flames jump the queue and become a dominant modern franchise? It's not by doing the same things you've always done.
Yeah, and that's the challenge in life, in every business, is to want to look and realize, okay, what we're doing, and it doesn't have to be like a massive overhaul. It can be a small, subtle change in one direction here. It's going to have to be multiple ones, right? Drafting, developing obviously has to be key. Avoiding. You've talked about a lot. There's going to be a contract that's maybe a little bit overpaid. As long as it's not grotesquely overpaid, you should be all right, because there's going to be some guys that you sign that end up giving you way more value than you thought they were going to give you. Because otherwise, they probably would have asked for even what they thought they were give you. Otherwise, they would have asked for more money, right? So there's lots of things to look at. So realistically, if we're looking at the franchise of the future, what do you think would be like the top 3 priorities?
Number 1 is evidence clearly about what happened in Seattle this year. Did anybody that we know pick the Seattle Seahawks to win the Super Bowl?
I'm sure somebody.
No, but I mean, sure, somebody did in some bar in Seattle. But I mean, what they did last year is they brought a call. We had Steve Hauschka on last year, the former kicker with Seattle, who's now working with the leading cultural guru in sport, Michael Gervais. Michael worked with Pete Carrot to build the culture for the first Super Bowl win, and then they brought him back this year. And all those stories you see about Mike Macdonald are in part because Mike Macdonald's a bright young guy, but they're a large part due to the work Michael Gervais did to help them rebuild the culture, because that's what he does. So number 1, I would bring in a culture expert to change and build the culture. The second thing I would do is I would evaluate artificial intelligence application to the draft, because what we know, all of us know, is the scouts, like all of us, are biased. And what AI can do in scrubbing scouting reports, they can evaluate the quality of the decisions made and recommendations made by scouts. So you know who in your organization is actually outperforming their contract. Then you look at analyzing AI. There's a new form of AI. It's called agentic AI. Right now, AI is simply a computer. It's a calculator. You type in a question, it gives you an answer, like a calculator. And it's limited by the amount of information and the timeliness of the information that was put into the large language model, which is the information that it relies on to answer the questions. What's happening now, and that's nice. It's descriptive. It's not predictive. But AI, agentic AI, if people read about it, is the bots are now talking to each other. So imagine this: we being an NHL team, could build 5, 6, 7 bots. These bots can watch every single game a prospect plays during his draft year, every single game we have video on for the 5 or 6 years preceding that, because of all the video in the arenas. One bot can watch speed with and without puck. One bot can watch body language, the biggest determiner of attitude. One bot can watch various terms of skating analysis and stick length and other things, and provide you every single morning with a report on every single scout. Now, this is critically important. It's probably a longer discussion we might need to go in the next Senate. One of the biases that is really fascinating, where AI can probably generate massive returns, right? It's in what we call the relative age effect. We grow up playing hockey, if we're born in January, with kids that were born in December who have a massive disadvantage to us because of size, speed, maturity, and other things. We also have another overlay that affects the draft. We got kids drafted in late September. We're playing against guys that are drafted in early September the following year. How do you measure that? Can you imagine bots being able to watch every single game and tell scouts that in March to April, this young man born late in the draft year is now progressing at a rate that would suggest he's going to outperform and be a much better player than we've rated in the top 10 early in the draft because of the age difference. So having that kind of information piped into your office, and these guys, these bots, they're like employees. You walk in and you'll have a pop on your computer saying, yes, I prepared a report for you. And do you want an oral report on the 16 prospects you talked to me about yesterday? Or do you want a written report sent to your email? That kind of thing will give them a massive advantage in not only avoiding biases, but these bots are able to predict very accurately based on all the information that they can access. Keep in mind, a bot can process 1 trillion pieces of information in less than a minute. Compare that to a scout. So there's a lot of opportunity in scouting. So I would do that, but primarily I would look to create a structure that will effectively result in you succeeding. I would have a dual track system where you have, maybe it's a president of hockey operations, or call him a chief hockey something, and he would oversee the general manager who's working in the business. And the general manager would have a sidekick that we would call maybe the senior vice president of competitive advantage. And his responsibility would be working with technology companies, with innovation hubs, with sports science organizations around the world, from the Australian Institute of Sport to the Manchester City Football Club Innovation Hub, mining opportunities to help us get better. But if you don't have that structure in place, you can talk innovation. You can have a guy in your holding company or the company that owns the sports team throwing out ChatGPT stuff, but you cannot succeed unless you have that basic structure. So I would build the structure, hire the people, bring in the cultural experts to try and begin building the culture that you need, because it's interesting. There's body language experts. Vanessa Van Edwards, she's been studying body language for a number of years, and she has indicated, based on her research, and this makes sense. Think Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl for a minute. If you work within 25 feet regularly of a high performer, the statistic and the research suggests you will perform at about a 15% higher rate on average. Look at the Oilers last year in the playoffs, playing for Connor, playing around those two great superstars. If you play in or work in an environment with low performers, you can drop as much as 25, 30%. And we see that play out all the time. So these bots, being able to measure body language, will be able to give a real accurate prediction of what a player's attitude. Like we all know, we know if you're I walk into the studio, Jason, if you're not having a great day, I can see it almost instantly in your body language if I'm paying attention. The bot's much more observant than we are, and as a result will give us invaluable information. How does he carry himself? How does he react to a bad play? How does he react to being benched? How does he react to not getting a pass when he's open? And all of those kinds of things can help them make a lot less mistakes. And the goal with AI is not to be perfect. It's to be a lot less stupid.
Yeah. No, that is fair. Jason Gregor, Rich Winter with you. We'll take a quick break. We're going to come back more on the discussion about the right vision, a technology-driven hockey franchise, how it can help things. It doesn't mean that you don't have human beings working for it. It just you use the tools that can benefit you. There's a few other ones that we'll discuss because other teams are doing this. That's the thing. This is not something that's pie in the sky. Teams are actually doing this right now, and NHL teams who aren't are simply falling behind. We'll discuss it more on the Gregor Show, presented by PlayAlberta.ca. We're talking about kind of the framework for technology-driven hockey franchise. And I know we got a lot of texts and people saying, oh, you can't just do it with technology. It's not going to help. But there are teams doing it. Right? It doesn't mean that the humans aren't part of it. You're still scouting. Like you still need eyes on the ground, because you still have to put in the information, right? You
Look,
can't get, right?
I love comments by the uninformed. How many certifications in AI do they have before they admit those kinds of? It's absolutely ridiculous. Every single one of the Los Angeles Dodgers, the Golden State Warriors, the Manchester City FC, Paris Saint-Germain, they're all using it. But you're right, humans are extremely important for two reasons. AI will make mistakes. Right now, for example, there's a company that we do business with called Invisible Technologies out of Silicon Valley. And what they do is called train the large language models. Now, the large language model in the case of ChatGPT is the internet. And we all know there's errors, there's misinformation on the internet. I didn't realize till recently there's thousands of PhDs working with that company to help make sure the bot or the ChatGPT bot makes less errors. So yes, you need humans involved in the process to check it. Well, he said this about the body language. It might make a mistake in reading it, but it's very accurate in a lot of areas and gives you a lot more information. You could scrub the internet tomorrow using these bots, evaluate every single blog on the internet and determine which bloggers over the last 10 years have been very, very accurate, and perhaps use that information for questioning your scouts and understanding the holes in your scouting department might exist. They're just wrong, and the results are obvious. Now, the other part where you need the human is you're going to get a lot of information. You're going to have a lot more accurate information on the draft picks you're targeting. But in the end, you have to pick one. The bot might tell you, I like this one, and for these reasons. You're still going to have to sit down and maybe have the eye test and think about it. The biggest issue right now that Toronto Maple Leafs are going to have, and I think the best example for someone who doesn't understand this, I would suggest they do a little research and punch into their own computers Con Knoppel of the Charlotte Hornets and Invisible Technologies. They used video bots to review all of Con Knoppel, all of the competing draft picks in that draft. They used Invisible Technologies video system. There's a system right now, the NHL uses it, and the NBA uses it a lot. It's multi-cameras. In the case of the NHL, they use it to determine whether goals cross the goal line or there's offside, right?
Yeah.
Invisible Technologies has created a new technology where they can convert two-dimensional broadcast video into a three-dimensional digital product. So you can overlay players on top of each other and analyze them compared to existing NHL players. Anybody in the planet that says that won't be helpful, measuring within minuscule parts of a millimeter, things that are happening on the ice, are out of their minds and completely under touch with the reality that we're living in. But at the end of the day, you're right. It's the individual that in the end of the day is going to have to make the decision, and we're going to have to watch them. So if you study, and we can post a couple of books people can pick up. People are so behind. They're so scared of this technology, and it's simply, you have to think about it. It's like having 5,000 of the best PhDs on the history of the world who happen to be hockey experts at your beck and call 24/7. They don't sleep. They can do whatever you want. They can scrub information that you can't even easily digest with the human mind. It's just wrong. But again, it's an interplay between it. Now it frees scouts. Now they're not doing this mundane stuff that the bots are doing and printing these reports every morning. Now it allows scouts to take their longtime expertise and focus on more productive tasks.
Yeah.
People that say that, honestly, they're idiots.
Yeah, the other big one where there's always going to be a human element that I don't believe can be replaced by any bot or AI or anything is the right culture. And it's funny, we had last night, Bones, the head coach of the Columbus Blue Jackets, was pretty adamant that Columbus doesn't have the right culture. And it's interesting because Patrick Laine said this a year ago, and people, it's Patrick Laine. What does he know, right? He played video games so long. It's like, well, maybe he knew something, right? And it doesn't mean that they're all bad people. It just means they don't have the right culture. And building a culture is something that is, priorities are a factor. You have to have standards, and then you have to adhere to the standards, right? I think a lot of it starts, coaches. It always helps when your great player has high standards, because when your great player has high
they all
standards
do.
in whatever sport it is, that makes your team better, right? And it makes the coach's job easier. But you can't use AI to help a culture, but how can you use the intelligence or researching to help a culture or help
Well, the
build?
culture. Well, there's lots of performance indicators that Michael Gervais has developed to measure culture, to measure players' ability to perform under stress, to understand and manage their stress. This is an expertise. And again, to anybody who wants to debate it, look at the Seattle Seahawks under Pete Carroll when they won the Super Bowl. They had Michael as their cultural expert. He left to do other things over the course of the last decade. One of them was working with Satya Nadella to reform the culture at Microsoft. And he came back and worked with Mike O'Donnell, and the result is what it is. Mike is, again, back to your human element. You got to have a really good coach with really good communication skills. Then you enhance what he has by bringing in someone that this is their life's work. There are people that are studying slivers of things around the planet now, and they're very good in that sliver of work that they do. They may not be able to ever give you a stock tip or tell you whether or not which particular line combination would work, but they can tell and teach a player how to manage his emotions. We had Janice Taylor on a while back about emotional fitness, measuring that stuff, understanding it. The emotional system is what, to a large degree, impacts culture because it's the way players interact. And we had that segment last year on love. The fact is, what drives championships is the love and affection between players and their coach. The ones between the players are such that they will die for each other in those messy moments where championships are won or lost. They will not be selfish. They will be focused on team and not me. And those skills are teachable, and they're not teachable by a 55-year-old hockey coach who played in the NHL at the time when he was, coached by a 60-year-old that was living, his experience is 50 years back. It's taught by leading cultural experts. They don't know how to communicate. I can't tell you how many players in the NHL that I've worked with. I ask them what their coach wants from them, and they don't know because the coaches haven't articulated. And superstars, big problem with superstars. Coaches are intimidated. What am I going to teach Leon Draisaitl or Connor McDavid? And so I'd like, it's important to understand that like Satya Nadella did it right. Satya, when he took over Microsoft, if you all remember, 8 years ago, I guess 10 years ago when Satya took over, we were getting pop-ups to buy Windows this and Windows that. They were not innovating. They missed cell phones. They missed everything. So his view of it, I call it Satya's hot trick. He said, you got to have a clear vision. Second, you have to have the people to execute it. And third, you have to have the culture to support it. Now, in Satya's case, he went and bought 85 companies because he had nothing internally. And in this case, what you do is you don't bring in a cultural expert full-time 24/7. You go out and hire the best in the world, staff on demand, get from them what you need. And because they're working in a larger environment in their specialty, they bring a lot to the table and can execute in a very short order. Look, none of us do our taxes. Why? Why don't do them? Why not save a couple $1,000? Because we don't know what we're doing. We bring in a specialist. You bring in a cultural specialist, and that's what you need. I can't build it. Now, it's built sometimes because of the way people behave. Ken Holland and I've had many conversations about culture, and he doesn't understand why he's been good at it. But he's been good at it because of the way he's treated the players. I remember reminding him that he came to me in about December 18th year Adam Ernie was here and said, I just want to give you the heads up, Adam's going down. But he said, I'm not making the move until after Christmas because Adam, I want him to be with his 3 young children for Christmas here in Edmonton. And I said, Ken, you don't think that drives culture? You don't think that message goes around the dressing room? Now, some, sort of more traditional hockey people like Ken have figured it out by osmosis, either because of his background or something he learned somewhere. He's good at culture. He didn't know what he was doing exactly, as he would admit. But that, you've got to bring in it, and you can measure how people react. And they're very good at it. And I think when Michael is with the Seattle Seahawks 8 years ago or whenever it was they won their last cup and then arrives again this year and they win Super Bowls both times, he's doing something right, and I'd certainly want to be interviewing him to get more understanding. We should have Steve back on the show to talk about this at some point.
Yeah, we should. We're going to take a final break, and when we come back, I think there's something about what we deem the right process is. Everybody has a process. There's no doubt about that, but are you doing it the right way or the wrong way? And some of these teams have figured out that there are better strategies of what we deem process. We'll discuss it next in the Gregor Show with Rich Winter here on Sports 1440, sports1440.ca, presented by PlayAlberta.ca. About the future hockey franchise and following in the footsteps of teams that are already doing this in other pro sports, in the NBA and MLB, in Premier League, and over in Europe, in soccer, in cricket, that they've got some pillars in place. The teams are doing this. And one of the last steps, of course, are the right processes. And if you look at it, one of the key things that teams who eventually win the cup, where they're good at, is they identify and acquired undervalued player assets consistently. All you got, look at the Florida Panthers. Just look at Sam Bennett and Sam Reinhart. Look at what you had to give up to get them. Hardly any, like second round picks. What? Reinhart became
even gets worse.
Goals in the playoffs for you, right? Like that's unreal. And that is, so you look at that, and part of that would be scouting, Rich, but also part of it would be using the data available to plug in to give you the most data to say, where is a player that we can get? And the other thing is, and this is where the human element comes in, because you would know this, you talk to lots of GMs, when certain teams undervalue a type of player. Just everybody has a bias. Everybody has a bias. I have a bias. Rich Winter has a bias. Connor Halley has a bias. Every listener has a bias, and that's okay. And we view players differently automatically. And so the key is to find the one that says, oh, you know what? They don't really value this third line center the way we do. And we're going to get him. And guess what? We'll offer him a second round pick, and he's going to be tickled pink. And we're going to be ecstatic. Like I look at the Michael Handzus acquisition in 2013 doesn't get talked about enough. That was the trade that helped Chicago win the Stanley Cup. They gave up a fourth rounder to get Handzus, who was their second line center throughout the playoffs.
Well, it's all true. I think it's actually in some ways more basic than that. There are actually standard biases that we all know exist. And what I would do, like we know that players that produce that don't skate well get drafted later. We know that small defensemen from European countries get drafted later than their ultimate production as an NHL player would suggest. So I would be asking my scouts, like you talk about process, I would be doing all of the AI related research to get as much information as I could, but I would want to ask them, tell me in your territory, who are the best 5 of these? Guys that don't skate well but produce. Guys, all the guys we just named. That's where they are. We hear it all the time about goaltending. Oh, goaltending's a gong show. I don't know. Can you imagine any other organization saying one of their most key employees, they have no idea how to evaluate them? It's mind-boggling to me. And guys like Steve Valiquette, who we've had on the show, absolutely know how to do that. And so I think it's developing processes that help you understand. Now, it's fascinating when you think of a hockey team. And we joke about this amongst ourselves as agents, but players are held accountable every night. You can have 100 fans call you tomorrow about a game last night, and they'll give you a reasonably accurate assessment of what happened. They'll be informed. They played hockey. They understand it fairly well. A coach is evaluated, by 10 game segments, maybe by a year. A GM is evaluated over 5 or 6 years. They should be looking at all kinds of process measurements. For example, speed from entry level to NHL, development speed, and various other different types of returns. So you can measure someone like Brad Treliving in Calgary 5 years before the mistake manifests. You've got to have that. And it's important to change processes to make sure you have information collected and processes in place to measure the capabilities of the people that work for you. NHL teams don't do it. It's mind-boggling to me, but understandable, that most NHL team owners, they've made billions in other businesses, that what gives them the resources to buy an NHL team. And then they listen to things like, well, hockey's different. No, hockey's not different. It's a real estate investment trust. You acquire underdeveloped assets, or undervalued, get that piece of property before it gets rezoned, get that player who can't skate that well but produces, Vinny Prospal, right? Get that small player that's bought out, Marty Straka, and see him score 93 points a year. Have access and understand the market, then improve and develop your real estate. In this case, it's players, and then manage them. Don't sign them to long-term deals at 35 and get stuck with that. So it's mind-boggling that they accept this. And so until the teams that have been successful, private equity firm bought Guggenheim Harpers. Series of private equity investors bought the Golden State Warriors. A couple of sheiks bought Manchester City with a lot of money and a lot of resources and a lot of talented people around them. They just ran their businesses like they did their other businesses and didn't buy into the garbage. Ooh, it's different here. It's like touch it. You got to have a feel for it, Feel schmeal. It's a bunch of freaking garbage that people use in management to be held unaccountable. And then everybody gets upset that Tom Dundon's actually getting involved in his business. Like, people are genuinely angry about that. Well, the guy's an operator. He's made billions of dollars operating companies. And he says to all of us, Rich, I'm an operator. I bought a company. I'm going to operate it. And actually, Rich, I think I'm doing a pretty good job.
Yeah.
And he is. He hasn't won So ultimately, until these owners wake up and treat hockey teams like their own businesses, fans are going to be upset. And here's the real problem that's coming for ownership and for management. AI is available to all of us. It's going to become more accessible. People are going to get more familiar. They're not going to say stupid things like it doesn't help when they don't even know what it does. They're going to start to understand it, and they're going to start to use it to evaluate. They're going to start calling shows like yours, and they're going to have information that will all of a sudden start circulating. And you and I will be talking about what some young guy from Mumbai who fell in love with the game of hockey, who's in some Mumbai Technical Institute, when he visited Toronto, he found it to be a way better game than the field hockey he played, and he'll be throwing out things on some internet site that will be transformative. These technology doesn't develop at the big companies, even the Microsofts of the world at times. It develops in a garage where a guy like Steve Jobs and whatever the other guy's name was, created something different. And we're going to find through the internet that there's going to be the ability for much more information to circulate. And if teams aren't prepared to access it by having systems in place to access that information when it's available, they'll fall behind. And you know what? AI is traveling so fast. When your hockey team falls behind, it is never catching up.
Lastly, do you get a sense that there's a few NHL teams that are ahead of the curve on this already?
Not dramatically ahead, but yes, there's some that are moving towards certainly a lot more data. The data is helpful. It's more descriptive. Like, this is what happens when we do this. It's not as predictive as artificial intelligence is, but you're hearing of teams moving towards this direction. And if Tom Dundon and his crew is 5 years ahead of everybody else in data analysis, they're going to be 10 years ahead of everybody else in AI at some point, because they're looking at these kinds of things. They're not letting the Toronto Maple Leafs interview Eric Tulsky because they have a pretty good one. Like, everybody else will let the other teams interview their best talent. Why are we doing that? I wouldn't. I signed a guy for a 5-year deal. He's a stud. He's staying here. I don't care if he's a player or a scout or assistant general manager, and I'm going to try and extend him before somebody else wants him again. And so run your business like the rest of your businesses, and do a favor to your fans who have been, look at every year. It's not like the old days that every year, it used to be 8 teams didn't make the playoffs. Now half of them don't. And it's hard to come back if you don't make mistakes. So the big issue for Toronto right now is using whatever technological resources they have access to. And we should talk about Konopka, because it's amazing how that came about and how they selected him, and how he, despite his small size and relative draft position in terms of projections, is going to be probably the rookie of the year this year in the NBA. It's amazing. But the Toronto Maple Leafs are now, maybe they're going to get, if they lose tonight, they get a top 5 pick, right? Maybe. They could be a 6, but they're going to get a 6.
It depends on the lottery, yep.
It could be a 1. It could be a 1 to a 6. So, and they just got, from 2 weeks ago, they had no picks in the first and second round. Now they could have a top 5 pick, potentially. Maybe a number 1 pick overall. And they're going to have a second round pick. Now, the questions they have to ask themselves is, because we all know quite often, especially this draft, which is fairly spread out, there's not the studs like the McDavids at the top end. Should I trade for 9 and 15? Right? They're going to have to look at those things because they're now in a position with maybe trading some of the aging assets that they have now for picks and prospects, and then doing very well in this draft. That's going to be maybe lead to a rapid turnaround. And you know, one thing I hate the two words retool and rebuild. Well, I like to use the word renovate, because until you get into an organization like the Toronto Maple Leafs or any other organization which you might be taking over, you know, we all had a renovation. I was told it was 25 grand until we ripped up the floorboards and figured out like the cancer that was underneath. In this case, the culture is worse than we thought it was, than other problems we didn't know about. You can't say rebuild or retool. You renovate, and you renovate by doing a complete detailed analysis of your organization and figure out if the termites have got into the half the building, all of the building, or none of the building. Because anybody that talks about retool or rebuild without the facts is like the idiots that were, shouldn't say these are our customers, but the guys writing on that AI won't help. You got to have at least the basic information as what's wrong with your organization, what's wrong with the house, under the flooring, before you start actually deciding what you need to do.
Well, Rich, I can tell you flat out, Toronto can get all the picks they want until they change the culture of their team and have a tough team to play against. It's not going to matter. That's they had a decade of a team that was very skilled, and as the head coach of Columbus said yesterday, like when it gets hard, that's when it's hard to win. The playoffs are much harder to win. Down the stretch in the final 3 weeks of the season, it's much harder to win than it is in the first 3 weeks of the season. And I look at Toronto, they couldn't figure out their guy. Like I look at Austin Matthews, and he's a highly skilled player, and he's a very good defensive player. But when was the time that Austin Matthews made other guys around him better, or Austin Matthews would take a game over by himself emotionally? You see that Nathan McKinnon does it. Connor McDavid does it. Leon Draisaitl does it. Right? Like those guys will take a game over just with their will. And I've never seen that from him. And I don't see it from but
it comes back to the basics. First, you need a lot of information, whether it's AI generated or otherwise, to pick the best character guys, the guys that have that in their DNA. And then you don't sit in your hands. You bring in experts to help them learn more how to develop that. And you're absolutely right. And Phil Jackson said it best. And I should send you the quote. You can post it online. It basically talks about if you can have all of these elements, but if you don't have a culture of love, respect, and support and trust among the people you're in the trenches with, like Navy SEALs will tell you, they know who doesn't make it, Jason. The big, strong guy doesn't make it necessarily. The former college quarterback doesn't make it as a Navy SEAL. It's the guy who, when the going gets tough, when he's exhausted after 36 hours in some hole, completely surrounded by water in the dark of night, will risk his life to save his buddy. And if you can't draft players that have elements of that, you're Toronto. You don't win.
Yeah. I know some people think it's a culture's over it. You need skill. There's no doubt you need skill, but there's lots of teams that have skill. So then do you have the guys who are willing to go above and beyond for their teammates or themselves in a tough situation?
Well, like we know, we've heard that saying, talent or hard work trumps talent every time talent doesn't work hard. And we've seen hundreds of examples over the course of sports history where underdogs won because they had Dwayne Rollison and he just played out of his mind at one point. Or I thought last year, I said to Stan Bowman, like, who are those guys on the second, third, and fourth line last year in the playoffs? They weren't the same guy during the play that they were during the regular season, but that group of guys last year turned it up. Were they inspired by Connor and his passion? Were they inspired by the fact they wanted their captain who gives so much to win the cup that he coveted? I don't know what it was, but when push came to shove last year, everybody was on the game. That includes Calvin Pickard, right? Who was there when they needed him. And the goaltenders delivered to a degree, but that group fought for each other. And we saw it with the Blue Jays. They loved each other. They loved playing with each other, loved being with each other. They wanted to win for each other. And when you want to win for yourself, you might be able to pull a team along with you, but when you want to win for each other, that's why Dennis Rodman becomes a star in Chicago, because they had the culture to bring him in. Most importantly, Phil Jackson didn't suspend him when he said he wanted a week off to go in Vegas, and honestly told him that he was stressed and overwhelmed by the pressure. Phil loved him. And when you love people, you work to understand them like you would with your children. He understood Dennis, treated him differently. We all have, if we have a number of kids, we don't treat them all the same if you want to have the best results. And at the end of the day, Dennis grew up in very difficult circumstances, didn't expect people to love him. He didn't feel lovable. Those types of people lash out. Dennis was one of them. But when the coach gave him the love and support and respect that he earned as an athlete and would often screw up as a human, boy, like Michael will tell you, when he came to the building, he was all businessmen. And they used that, motivated him with love and affection throughout the lineup, respected him, trusted him, despite his goofy hair colors and behaviors and all of that. And they won. And Michael will tell you, we don't win one of those last 3 trophies without Rodman. He's a scientist. He's the best in the world that ever did what he did. But he wouldn't have been there in probably 31 hockey teams. Because he had a guy show up like that in a junior hockey camp in the Western Hockey League or in a pro camp. I don't like his chances. And that's unfortunate, because if you have a culture, you understand you can bring in a Randy Moss, right? No problem. We got a culture here. We can bring in that guy and absorb it. Culture is important because, like I said a minute ago, it's proven that when you're surrounded by high performers, your performance will improve. If you're surrounded by low performance, your performance will dramatically decrease. That's culture, and it's measurable, and it's foundational.